corner so everybody can see
I'll,
it. Your presenter, so you can see. You're a bit.
Okay, so I'll bring it right out. Put a couple chairs at it.
They follow. She just said that they cut it out.
Yeah, this is,
You just put it right outside the door.
don't realize like what you're looking at.
Right. I think you just have to talk, not look at it. So how do you know Keith?
I don't know.
It came from his house, that's why it's so weird to see this. So did you get the labor thing? Where I got this from, they're the- from the Labor Council, maybe? I'm not very good. But it's been- Is there anything we can do? Hey, how are you? It's still full running, and then it's full running every day this week. Last week, this week, it's like. I can't figure out what's going on.
No, it's been,
It's one.
Yeah, yeah.
I do.
I don't know if you can see it right down the right hand corner, giving us a little activity windows thing that I can't seem to get rid of that. And at the moment, other than swap the computer out. On the Zoom screen, you don't see it, but on the screen, you should see it. It's better. I think once it's in full screen, I think it sizes it to that, yeah. And unfortunately, probably the only way to do it is that, just zoom in from there. Either way. Your Zoom morning does not have. Well, they'll, I mean, once I share this, yeah, we'll share it, but I mean, it's not shared. Okay. You're good with sharing the meeting. It should be okay. That's why I just want to make sure you're good with, just look between those.
You have to know what your kids.
Yeah, although.
Oh, so maybe you want to get out of that space. Yeah. Not even share it. All right, Zoom, can you hear us? Excellent.
Yes, I can.
Task force or advisory board member, feel free to unmute yourself as it comes up. Everyone else, we have a small period at the end for public comment. We'll see how quick we get through everything. We're going to try to keep it to 75 minutes. It's beautiful out, and there are a lot of other things going on tonight. So if I could have the co-chairs. Well, I guess we don't need both, but if one of you guys wants to go through and just do a roll call.
Go ahead.
It should be on the top sheet there.
So Dan Ballafaro, Bart Barafaldi. Robert Gibson. Present. Bill Hughes.
Thought that was on there. Bill, you still with us?
Bill, you on Zoom? Meredith Kane.
Hey there, Meredith Kane, present.
Brandon Mullins. Okay. Rob Terry. Rob is gone. Tim Stalker. Yeah. Kelly Sweet. Dennis Wedlick.
Here.
And Chris Brown.
I don't matter.
Yeah.
You know, Chief, I gotta share. Okay, so quickly we'll go through some of the things that you guys are already aware of. Obviously, other people not on the task force don't know this quite yet. We're about to find out. So the task force, since the January 25th kickoff meeting, we established an organizing committee that broke out the task force into 3 component subcommittees that work on 3 different issue areas. They meet each week, leading up to the task force committee meeting at the end of the month. That organizing committee met February 22nd. The task force goals, and just as a basic structure thing, I'll go through each of these, and then we'll circle back and start at the top if anybody's got any pointed feedback that they didn't already give during other committee meetings. So we established task force goals and objectives, task force committees and committee objectives, how the task force and advisory board will coordinate their activities, and then the task force and committee meeting schedules. Goal 1 was to preserve and expand housing affordability, attainability, and availability throughout Columbia County. Goal 2 was to engage and energize communities and
stakeholders to increase awareness of and create responses to housing issues. And Goal 3 development provides towns and villages resources to help them achieve their housing goals. Within each of those goals, there are objectives that are real, attainable, concrete objectives. The first one, or goal 1, is to research grant opportunities and develop a grants pipeline. Objective 2 is to conduct an audit of properties that can be rehabilitated or developed. I think you've heard me refer to a parcel audit a few times that refers to. And objective 3 is to identify and support property acquisition / development / disposition partners. Those are existing partners, or if there are organizations that are thinking about addressing this issue that are kind of in the works, we'd like to support them as well. Goal 2 objectives: cultivate and empower local housing advocates. This came from the Housing Brief and Housing Forum. That's basically connecting with people that are in the towns and villages to be the advocates for housing locally, but also kind of act as nerve for us to give us feedback about what they're doing. Objective 2 is to establish an online presence, website, social media, etc. And we'll get to each of these objectives as we get to the committees that are responsible for them. And objective 3 is to connect with regional neighbors and learn from their successes. There's no sense in reinventing the wheel. There are some really good wheels out there locally that we can just sort of take our cues from. The goal 3 objectives: the first one is to create a housing planning toolbox. By far the most popular concept from kickoff meeting. I think 70% of people that spoke that night were interested in housing planning toolbox. Objective 2 is to present towns and villages specific right-sized development options. So this is something that again was in Path for Progress's housing brief. They've got an entire appendix of development types that can fit into existing characters of communities. And objective 3 was to assess town zoning bylaws for housing friendliness. I feel like we'll have a conversation about that as we get to the committee that's responsible for it. That one's been popular when we have conversations about. So once we established the goals and objectives, we broke up committees and assigned objectives to each of the committees. So we've got the outreach committee responsible for all of goal 2. And again, goal 2 was engaging, energizing communities and stakeholders. The outreach committee is comprised of Supervisor Brenda Adams, Bob Gibson, Bill Hughes, Kelly Sweet, and Michelle Tullo from the City of Hudson as a special advisory board member. The policy committee is all of goal 3. Goal 3 again is to develop and provide towns and villages resources to help them. So the planning and housing toolbox would be a big part of that. Certainly not the only thing. Policy committee is again Supervisor Brenda Adams, also Supervisor Ron Hahn. I've got Dan Barfaldi, Meredith Keene, Tim Stalker, and Michelle's on that one as well. And then our pre-development committee, which is responsible for all of goal 1, which is really the overarching goal, and that's to preserve and expand housing affordability, attainability, and availability. And the pre-development committee is Town Supervisor Brenda Adams, Brandon Mullins, Rob Gary, Dennis Weather, and Michelle's a special advisory board member. So the next task the organizing committee had was to figure out how the task force and advisory board would interact. So we decided the committee makeup would just be task force members. So each committee has between 2 to 4 task force members, and then there are a couple of floaters. Supervisor Adams would be kind of floating between each of them. We've got Michelle's on there as the housing justice director from Hudson. Hudson's the head of the county as far as addressing their housing issues. We'll see a presentation from Michelle towards the end of the meeting about the success that Hudson has already had in the past 2 years. So the advisory board members will act as professional resources to the task force. So as certain topics come up that certain advisory board members have great deal of experience and expertise in, we'll bring them in and we'll be on them, just kind of learn from their experiences. Advisory board members will occasionally be invited to brief the task force or committee on topics. So if there's something that we're considering doing or something that we're interested in, we'll just have a special presentation. The idea is to actually have a different presenter each month at one of these meetings, about a 10-minute presentation. The one today is a little bit more of an overall housing strategy presentation. We'll have much more focused presentations that kind of develop the strategies that we're interested in. Meeting schedules. We've got recurring meetings for all of the committee meetings and the full task force meeting. The committee meetings are not open to the public. We meet best during the day. They're kind of, it's a lot to really accommodate people's schedules to have those meetings. But everything that happens at those meetings will be reported out during the full task force meeting, so the public will see the results of everything that happens. don't know that anybody's particularly interested in when we actually have those, except for this meeting, so it will always be the last Wednesday of the month, I shouldn't say always. It will ostensibly be always the last Wednesday of each month at 4 p.m. Locations will vary. The idea is to try to move around throughout the county, get into different towns. We started really at a high bar, thanks to Columbia Green Community College for offering us this space today. I don't know if we'll find another space that has all of these bells and whistles, but we'll try. And now we'll just get to the individual committee meetings unless anybody has any questions or comments at this point. And that includes the Zoom folks. Zoom task force and advisory organizations.
Chris,
Yes,
you mentioned you actually met with each one of the members too.
I met with everybody during
You
the
put a lot of
first.
effort into that. I think that was a good thing.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think during the first 2 or 3 weeks I was here, I was averaging about 2 meetings a day for a month or so. No, I learned a lot from everybody, and I really wanted to get a sense of not just, some of the advisory board members and some of the task force members represent organizations. But I wasn't just curious about what your organization brings to the table. I was curious about why did you accept this appointment? What do you want to see? But I got a lot of that. I see something in the chat. Yes. Okay, the outreach committee met first, and again, the outreach committee is responsible for goal 2, which is to engage and energize communities and stakeholders. That's awareness raising, but it's also, again, getting people out there that can give us feedback about what they're hearing and seeing in towns. Our first objective was cultivating and empowering local housing advocates. This actually came up today. Supervisor Adams, you've seen this. I think everybody in the outreach committee saw this. The governor's office, through their housing compact, kind of on their landing page, now has a button for a survey that people can take. Or it's really just kind of self-reporting. There's just a text box you can write in free-form your issues with housing issues or housing affordability. We were thinking about doing something similar, just to kind of put a face on who is being affected by affordable housing issues. It's pretty clear that as you go to the town and start to have more conversations about affordable housing, there's still this sort of misconception of who is affected by escalating housing prices. It's certainly, definitely people at the lower end of the income spectrum, but Columbia County's housing issues have sort of evolved to now people making 100 or even 120% of the area median income are having a really hard time buying housing. So the idea of the face of affordable housing is to be just that, just to kind of dispel the myth that there's a certain subset of the population that's what's affected. And then the other thing we were considering was an employer and employer survey. There was something similar. Kelly, you sent this to me not too long ago. There was a similar survey floated, but that was 8 or 9 years ago. So we have heard a lot from employers that they're challenged in hiring people. They're certainly challenged in just traffic as well. A lot of the restaurants have reduced hours, or operating at reduced staff. A lot of that is people can't find places to live locally. So partnering with the employers, I think, is going to be a huge boon for us. Objective 2 was to establish an online presence. Some of this is pretty easy. CEDC's website seems to make the most sense to house the task force's online information, at least for now. If we expand and kind of spin up to, if we get too big for CEDC to make sense as a host, we'll just spin out to our own page. But for now, there's a live here section on CEDC's page, so we'll just build that out, and that will be raw task force information. The second action was to get some social media presence. I have locked down social media handles. It seemed like the outreach committee was okay with this. The full task force has real harsh feedback about this particular handle. I'm open to it. The one that we went with was Home in Columbia. The idea there is that if you're on Instagram, it will still say Columbia County Housing Task Force, but the actual handle will be at Home in Columbia, which is adorable. And then you can run different kind of campaigns with I'm at home in Columbia, or I want to be at home in Columbia. So hopefully that's got some legs. I think that's interesting branding, but I'm open to feedback. So those two, I think, are pretty well locked down. The first action, we just need to actually build that out and start posting things on that stuff.
Great. Hey, Chris, it's Meredith Kane. It's Meredith Kane on the Zoom. Is it possible for you to speak as closely into the microphone as possible? I know we're all getting feedback on the who are listening electronically.
Microphone is 20 feet away.
Oh,
I can speak louder.
all right. That's clear. So what you were just saying. So okay, keep it up. Thanks.
I'll slow down too. I'll speak up and slower. Objective 3 was to connect with regional neighbors and learn from their successes. I've already spoken to, there's a version of me in Ulster County. He's their housing coordinator, for lack of a better term. Ulster is a little bit ahead of Columbia. They, excuse me, they instituted a housing smart communities initiative. It's based on the Climate Smart Communities Initiative that comes from NYSERDA. That's basically a set of incentives that the county offers to their municipalities. So they hit certain landmarks, certain benchmarks in addressing housing. They receive a number of carrots. Some of it is direct funding, some of it is technical assistance. That's a pretty robust program. Dutchess County also had a housing needs assessment. Columbia County had one in 2017 tires. Dutchess released the housing needs assessment last March, and one of the recommendations was to start a countywide housing trust fund, which they started last October. So Dutchess is moving really quickly, and we can learn a lot from them. And then the other action to reach out, this kind of crosses borders. Braylock, who is in town in Hudson, but operates throughout the county. They have in Massachusetts a loan program that is specific for people's rental deposits. When we talk about housing, we also talk about rental housing, not just home ownership. And a really big barrier for certain income levels is paying your current rent, but also saving money for your next deposit. And in Massachusetts, that can be 3 months worth. Here in New York, it's only 2. Greylock offers really low interest loans to people, specifically for rental deposit payments. And their program was fully repaid in the first 6 months of offering to rental tenants. So it's a really successful program that I think has application here as well. Sound any better now?
Yes, this is actually much better. Thanks.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so that was all of outreach committees. Anything else besides the sound quality for feedback on outreach? Excellent. Okay. Policy committee. Again, policy committee. Yes.
Chris, I'm sorry, just one question. Do we already have a presence on the Columbia Economic Development Corporation website, or is that just to come?
It's to come. We have some of our information is there. So there's the link to the kickoff meeting. There's the Zoom link for this meeting. There are links to the housing brief and the housing forum. But as far as what this task force produces, there's not a spot for that yet, just because there hasn't been a lot of production yet. This is our first real meeting.
Okay.
So that's a spin up. That's where everything will live. Okay, so the policy committee is responsible for goal 3, which is to develop and provide to towns and villages resources to help them achieve their housing goals. We talked about the housing planning toolbox. That's the first objective. Again, very popular. What I think we want to do, what came out of the policy committee was to just ask the towns which planning toolbox items, and we'll offer them a menu of here are the things that we're thinking about. Ask them which ones they would like us to develop first. So then we'll prioritize those topics. My goal is to have, my personal goal is to have 6 of those done before our next meeting. And some of them I think are going to be pretty low hanging fruit. I think everyone's pretty interested in at least having some kind of model bylaw for ADUs. So that's pretty easy to produce. There was a specific request for a version of inclusionary zoning language. That's less easy to do, but can be done. But a half dozen of these, I think, make sense in the next 4 to 5 minutes. I think that's doable. And that is something that I have personal experience developing those when I work in Berkshires. So I think that's going to be a pretty easy transition just to pull some of those over and make them make sense for New York and for Columbia County. So that's the first 2 objectives. Objective 2 is to present town and village specific right-sized gentle density development options. This is referring to the appendix from Pattern of Progress's housing brief. Some of these are existing, and we'll kind of get to, I'll get to that a little bit later, but there are new forms of development that you can add to towns that fit right into the existing character. I know there's a lot of concern. I think the concern around the physical characteristics of affordable housing has to do with the fact that most affordable housing you see put up is minimum 40 units, anywhere between 40 and 120. But that's because it makes economic sense for developers to operate at that scale. Obviously, we're not going to go put that up in really anywhere in the county. So we're going to talk about right size options. The next action is develop options for as currently zoned and post housing friendlies. My personal feel on that is to maybe put a pin in that until we talked about that housing friendliness zoning review a little bit more. But I'm open if anybody wants to move straight ahead with that. But there was some feedback about that I think we need to drill down a little bit more specifically on that particular action. Which gets us to objective 3, which to assess town zoning bylaws for housing friendliness. The idea here is to develop a matrix against which you compare existing town bylaws. Some things are really low hanging fruit. Where do you allow 2-family units? Where do you have really high minimum acre sizes, minimum lot sizes? And some of the zoning bylaws haven't been updated in 15 years, so it's just a good idea to review them anyway. And then Dan Barafaldi smartly pointed out that one thing that we should do, this is action 3, is to look at where towns and villages are in their current housing timelines. So have they amended their comp plan recently? Have they amended zoning bylaws recently? Do they have some kind of local housing programs that are currently in place? How are those working? So just getting our hands around that at a county level, but specific to the towns as well. Oh, and then there's a small piece of goal 1 that the policy committee also catches, which is again that overarching one. And that was objective 1 to research grant opportunities and develop a grants pipeline. Policy and pre-development both have this as an objective. The idea with separating them or sharing them between those 2 committees, that the policy committee would look at kind of foundational, recurring, programmatic grants, and then pre-development will look at site-specific grants. So this is what's going up here, or this is what we'd like to see go up here. Let's find some money for it. And then one more action for the pre-development. One more action for this committee is consider organizational approaches. We'll hear a little bit about some of the organizational approaches that Hudson has already initiated in the past since 2020, I believe. So they're all really rapidly. These are things like community land trusts, land banks / land banking, and housing trust funds. All these are 3 things that are very different, but if they are all present in the same location, have an amazing capacity for change. Last committee, is there any feedback on policy committee before I move on?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So you keep mentioning we're gonna do this with the community, we're gonna do that with the community. Who's the community? Are we talking about the town supervisor, the town board? Are we gonna encourage them to set up a committee?
A lot of the towns already have committees. They either housing committees or actually affordable housing committees. Some of them have both, some have one or the other. It's going to be parallel lines. I think there are going to be some conversations that should be held with elected officials. The outreach committee, I think part of their job is to sort of build up those ad hoc volunteer associations. So some conversations I think will make sense for those folks, for that cohort. And some conversations, especially when you're talking about policy changes, I think those are going to make sense to have with public officials or appointed officials, depending on.
So that's what it is.
Your case may be.
Throughout the talk.
Yeah, the town doesn't really have a voice, right? So who had the town?
And then I think you gotta be careful when you start talking about the comprehensive plan, tell them, you can't just walk out and say, town, update your comprehensive plan. I'm on the town of Austerlitz. We're gonna spend over $30,000 to update ours.
Oh, yeah.
There's not much grant funding for those things either. We researched it and that. So, I mean, you gotta be careful, because there's a lot of towns would like to do that. I mean, they'd like to do it every 5 years, just like the state tells us.
Oh, yeah. I think Well, that's not a decision.
You just gotta kind of,
You can only reference the comp plan just to see if anybody had recently.
We're gonna collect the data.
Yeah. And also, just to be clear, because this came up in the conversation about the zoning review for housing friendliness. The task force doesn't have the power to compel or
oh, no, I
mandate towns.
understand that, yeah, and I think that's, needs to be clear, we can't tell them what to do.
Yeah, and I sort of see us as, the task force was created sort of in the wake of both the housing brief and the housing forum, and I think we're the connective tissue between those recommendations and the towns and the villages being interested in carrying out those recommendations, right? So that they were handed a set of recommendations, and then they were, allowed to review them, or there was really no county level resource for them to go to and say, hey, we're interested in this, how can we do this? And that, I think, is by the county chair formed the task force.
So the other thing I would add is that at the origination of these conversations, many towns, their first question is, how do we get started? So these are the things that these are the things that you want to have in place and you can be working on until these other things actually materialize. How do we get shovel ready?
Yeah, and shovel readiness, really, that informs the creation of the committees, right? That's what pre-development's about. It's about getting not just sites, but also towns kind of shovel ready for, if the developer wants to come in, are you lined up? You already have all your pre-dev work.
Including the political will for those projects.
Okay, so the pre-development committee is mostly goal one to preserve, that's again, the overarching goal to preserve affordability, attainability, and availability. We talked about the difference between the grants that pre-dev is interested in versus policy. So that was one of the project-specific grants and funding. And then one of the other ideas was to develop a matrix, again, kind of like that housing friendliness matrix. And this will sort of score parcels, developable or rehabilitable parcels, for which grants they make the most sense for. That way you're not applying for things that aren't relevant to whatever parcel you're looking at, parcel or parcel is. Objective 2 was to do that parcel audit, conduct an audit of properties that can be rehabbed or developed. I'm starting to compile a database of low-hanging fruit. I don't think it's going to take very long. There isn't really a lot of publicly held or governmentally held land throughout the county, so that should be done pretty soon. One of the ideas that came out of pre-dev was to take a look at code violations, especially repeat code violations throughout the towns. Maybe that's a building that could benefit from a rehab grant. Reach out to that homeowner and see if that's something they're interested in. And then this came from Dennis Ludwig on the pre-development committee, a feasibility / build-out analysis of the properties. This is probably going to be a longer-term objective, but I think it has tremendous value to actually take a look at, if we identify parcels that we think are developable, what's the highest and best use from a housing standpoint of those parcels and how can you get it? And objective 3 is to identify and support those acquisition, development, disposition partners. I'm working on creating a roster of nonprofit, smaller scale developers. So not the developers that come in and put up 80 units of housing, but developers that work between 1s and 4s. Some of those are nonprofit, Alazon from Habitat, that's Habitat's bread and butter is smaller development. But there are other developers out there that will concentrate just on those smaller units. So bringing them into the fold and finding opportunities for them to get involved in it. Then the other action we touched on a little bit was to foster and develop virtuous cycles of development. That was at CLT, Land Bank, Housing Trust Fund. There are other housing models out there like co-housing, limited equity co-ops. No one of these concepts is going to be an answer, but they all make up kind of the arrows in the quiver that we're going to need to address the issue. Some things work together really well. Limited equity co-ops on CLT land is an amazing combination. So hopefully that's something that can get going sooner than later. That is it for everything I have. I'm going to come back after Michelle's presentation and talk about next steps for each of the committees, which I know is something that committee members are very interested in, so that we're not just a talking group, but an actual task force / working group. But if anybody, Dennis, I see you. I got you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering if we go back to the grants pipeline.
Which one? I've got two.
Just in general, I was wondering if anybody took a look at Climate Smart Communities program? Because if I remember correctly, they do not list climate smart housing development as one of the targeted action plans. They have a broad description at the bottom of it that says, and any other ideas the towns have that might help communities become more resilient and sustainable. But may it not be something we should advocate for? Because towns work very hard to get those points when they have climate smart community task force.
So are you asking if we want to fold in the climate smart communities into the housing approach?
Well, I don't know how many towns in Columbia County are actually signed up for the Climate Smart Community Program of New York State. But, pardon me?
I think most of them.
Okay, so on that, in that program, you get different points, right? You get different points for pursuing different objectives. And the more points you get, the more opportunities you have for getting grants. As far as I know, there's nothing on that list that specifically talks to developing sustainable housing. So I was just wondering if anybody looked into that and if that was a way to add incentive for towns to both apply for grants and to also get assistance to getting grants through the Housing Smart Communities program.
Might I add 2 cents on that?
Sure.
You know, I think we did kick this around a little bit. I'm not sure with which part of the group, but I mean, my vision is that we've got a lot of climate smart communities working very hard. And if we can capture grant funding to help people do improvements to the housing that they have or fix some derelict housing around the county, we have improved affordable housing in the county. So I definitely think that that's a part of the answer. It's not creating new, you know, energy efficient housing, which may be a whole other key to this, but I think that there's a lot of money out there now being pursued for energy improvements to the home, and that can help make affordable housing.
That's absolutely true. And it's a separate program. There's a clean energy program that NYSERDA is promoting. Again, I think that the only reason I'm bringing up climate smart community is I don't recall any specific line item that has to do with housing. Most of the line items have to do with land development, with infrastructure, with you know, replacing gas-fired equipment with electric-fired, but you don't see line items that have to do with housing, as far as I know, and the last that I looked. So I was wondering.
I could answer that if you want, since we're doing the program. I'm Lisa from Cornell Cooperative Extension. So we're doing 15 towns in Columbia County and the county. And you are correct. It is not on the individual housing property. Just so, yes, you were right, Dennis. We've never met. I'm Lisa.
Well, I think it's a great opportunity, both because I'm on my own town's climate smart housing task force.
Wonderful.
And you know, this is the kind of thing that we could bring people into town hall, you know, to talk about, raise awareness of what improvements they can make, because all of it is relating to reducing the cost of housing and increasing resiliency at the same time. So great, Lisa. I would be happy to, you know, have lunch and maybe we can talk about ways to pursue this.
Yes, there's some of the other CCEs that have the funding to do, they have these staff that are called energy advisors. And I will find out from my colleague in Dutchess who is doing that in Columbia County for everyone, okay? Because that is on the individual housing level.
Terrific, thank you.
That's something Ron and I are both on the Council Climate Smart Task Force.
Okay.
When we meet monthly, we could also take it back to that task force and speak to the state representatives who attend those meetings and ask them about adding it to their agenda.
Okay, great.
Because those programs the standards for those programs evolve regularly, and so we can give them the heads up, this is something they're interested
think that was everybody, right? From Zoom. I think that was everyone. Okay, I'm going to turn it over now to Michelle Tula from the City of Hudson, the City of Hudson's Housing Justice Director. Michelle's going to walk us through what Hudson's been up to for the past 3 years, the success they've had, and all the ideas we're going to see. Just going to get your share set up.
Okay, folks on Zoom, can you hear me?
No, could you speak up a little bit more?
I'll do my best. Is this better?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so hello everyone online and here. So Chris invited me to come speak a little bit about what the City of Hudson has been doing for housing. So I am Michelle Tula. I am the housing director in the City of Hudson. Been there almost 2 years. So I'm just going to briefly talk about some of the things we've worked on the past couple of years. So I'm going to hit 5 initiatives pretty quickly. Our housing trust fund, our scattered site housing development, our housing rehab grant, our short-term rental policy, and our community trust initiative. So the first one is our housing trust fund. So a housing trust fund is a fund of money. So ours is an account of money that's established by the City of Hudson. And it's also with the Hudson Community Development Planning Agency, HCDPA, which is an urban renewal agency, it's a public benefit corporation. So they are it's a public board under the city. So they're the ones housing our housing trust fund. And the purpose of it, its mission is to use the funds to preserve and increase affordability in Hudson for both rental and homeowners to prevent displacement of our residents and create more housing options. So the background of it. So in 2020, the City of Hudson applied for an anti-displacement grant from Enterprise Community Partners for $1 million. And that initiated a lot of the housing work, also coincided with the pandemic. And so the city, their main project was to create my position and the housing trust fund as part of that. And most of that $1 million is going to seed the housing trust fund. So about 600,000 of that million is in that housing trust fund to seed over the next several years. How the Common Council also resolved to create a housing trust fund in 2020. And I was hired in May 2021. And basically that first year, I was doing a lot of outreach, about 10 outreach events in the city, online and in person, and really thinking about the governance of creating it and the purpose. So then 2022, we actually formed it officially. We had an advisory committee making key decisions, and the City of Hudson started contributing from its general fund to the housing trust fund. This 2023 was our first year of actually doing programs. So what it's actually doing, so my salary comes from that, my position is a part of that. And then we also are running Hudson Roots, which is an emergency rental and mortgage assistance program. So it began during the pandemic as like a stopgap, people who were unemployed and weren't necessarily fitting into some of the other programs that were available from the state. Since the pandemic has dwindled, we've shifted its focus to be like a one-time emergency payment, and it really pairs with Greater Hudson Promise Neighborhoods is the ones administering it, and they have such a strong relationship with the community and knowing what people need. And a lot of times they can also come to people's eviction court or to prevent it by talking directly with landlords. So it's been really successful, and we helped. I'll talk more on the next page. Over about 80 households to date. Actually, yeah, we have over 80 households. A small part of what we're doing is policy memos. So we funded some outside consultants here and there to look at things such as inclusionary zoning, community land trust. And so the Housing Trust Board Advisory Committee is also recruiting people who are able to attend some meetings at the council or the IDA or whatever, to add a little bit more, another set of eyes on the housing policy that we give to our common council. And then the big thing we're gonna be doing is that's about like half our budget. The other half, we're gonna be opening up for competitive grants. And so we have been working on really well thought out grant guidelines of what that looks like, and that's gonna be open to either for development, to have funds for development, or for, it could be for organizational support, or it could be for like public programs already ongoing. And so that's something that we're gonna pilot this year. We'll see how it goes and we'll kind of tweak things. If we don't get, projects we like, then we'll save them money for next year and keep working on building up capacity in the city. And the last thing we do is outreach to get some more sense of what folks need. So our next initiative is our scattered site housing development. Yeah.
Question, just
Sure.
going back to trust,
Yes.
is that, your last year decision on council as to what general fund is trust, is a longer term commitment?
Yeah, so right now that's how it's been. I think our plan, since the seed funds are dwindling down, our plan is to ramp up public funds, and ideally they're going to be a more reliable long-term source of funds, so whether that be from lodging tax or airline tax. So we're looking into that, and kind of as we're building up our accomplishments and also making that case. So, yeah, so that's one of our goals, thinking about longevity. Okay, so then part of the grant, we did the affordable housing development plan with kind of progress. That was in 2021, and the plan really identified sites in the city, both publicly owned and private, that are meet criteria for housing development. And the plan kind of created what a possible pipeline for those sites would be, and what factors to consider with development. So this is just a map from that, like the right is the right sites that they have identified. So that was in like winter 2021 when that was approved. So we got rolling right away with actually enacting that. So the common council adopted it, and then we put out RFQ for development. We've selected the city-owned sites to put into that. We got 11 responses from really awesome developers. And then we invited 4 of them to give RFP responses. And in the summer, we selected Cardin and Hudson River Housing as the developers for those sites. And I'll show you what that looks like in a moment, but we spent the summer kind of talking to stakeholders to get a sense of what they wanted to see a little more specifically. And then the common council approved that sale in January. So within a year, we went from having a plan to now actually having a contract. So our proposal, so we're using 3 sites of land that are vacant, and it's going to be 2 rental apartment buildings. So one will be 21 units. It's going to be mixed income from 30% AMI, so very low income, to 110% AMI, which is more moderate income. And one building would have 2 commercial spaces, ideally a daycare and some kind of food-related community space. And then the other rental building would be 60 units, same income range. And other buildings have part of the engagement process. We figured out what the community wants to see in them. So some of that is the proposed all green energy, so solar and geothermal, parking spaces, outdoor amenities. And also like design facade that fits in with the neighborhood. The third piece is a small parcel of land the city owns that we are going to pilot 2 duplexes for low-income homeowners, about 60% to 80% AMI. And so they would purchase the whole duplex, they would live in the first unit, and the back unit they would rent out and use that income to help with their mortgage. But they received counseling through Hudson River Housing for a couple of years, in terms of how to be a homeowner, how to be a landlord. So we're going to pilot that. So for some homeownership opportunities. Okay, next initiative is our community development block grant housing rehab. So CDBG grants are available through the state Communities that are larger than us are entitled to funds from them every year, but as we're smaller, with this competitive process, we had to apply. However, the good news is that it's available regularly. So this is like if you start to get these grants, most towns consistently receive them. So we received a $500,000 award to perform critical health and safety repairs for homeowners. So it's either a single family house or it could be two family if the owner lives on one unit and rents out the other. And the idea being we have a focus on some rental programs, but how can we help homeowners who are having a hard time affording maintenance and upkeep? And especially a lot of the applicants. Some of them are seniors who are fixed incomes and they want to stay here, but the costs are high. And then some are first time homeowners who had enough to buy the house, but didn't have enough to fix it up. So we are on track to assist 9 to 11 households. I'm really excited about this because we've had some of these programs from other organizations in the city, but now we're able to increase the scale of housing.
Great. May I ask you a question about, does this require a lot of hands-on administration of the grants? In other words, when you give the grants to the homeowners, are you helping them with the contractors overseeing the work, scoping the work that needs to be done, so that there's actually, it's not just giving grants, but it's actually sort of running the work too?
Yeah, so for this, all the grants are different. For this one in particular, it does include like a mandatory percent of the amount is for administration. So I'm performing it some myself, and then some we have a third-party consultant performing. And basically, we're developing the work scope as the city and as a consultant, and then we're finding qualified contractors who are putting in bids. Then the homeowner is actually the one hiring the contractor. And then the homeowner and the contractor are agreeing on the final work scope. So we're there to monitor, but we're not there to actually hire a consultant contractor for a house, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
And there's, we're as a city, we're doing some more of the admin work for this, but I know from like the firm we hired is called Black and Reed. They worked in actually much smaller, more rural municipalities like Saratoga County, who they've done 100% of it. And so they've been able, this grant does include that money for that. Okay, so next I want to talk about our short-term rental regulation because that came up at the last meeting. So ours was passed in November of 2020. So this is just the brief tenets of it. So it says that residents of Hudson can operate up to 3 units on their personal land where they reside. And there's a date of you have to reside for 50 days a year. And the developer's STR can use for a maximum of 60 days if it's their actual unit that they live in. If you have that, you have to register with the city, so it's $100 annually plus 25 per unit. And then a lodging tax is paid per night. That's paid by the guest. It's taxed on adding on to their short-term rental cost. And the city of Hudson also had a process where you go to the zoning board of appeals. If, for example, if you showed that you had put a lot of money in this and you need to, make back what you've invested, et cetera, or whatever other reason there was, and then you granted the variance to operate for 3 years. So that's what we've had on the books. Yes, so we do have a third-party website that basically scans all of the ads that are online, compiles them, and then we check that against our registered list, and then we send out letters if they're not compliant. So this is a map from that website that shows all of the units. So you can see that there's a lot. There's quite a lot, and what we found is that in the past couple of years, having this, we've had most of the owners are local owners. What's some of the blue is showing what's a hotel. So it's picking up hotels that do short-term rental versus houses that are short-term rental. It's helped in terms of accountability for people to understand tracking owners, et cetera, issues, and it has brought in hasn't provided lodging tax revenue. Right now, our hotel and Airbnb is compatible one, so we don't have. As a city, it does take work to be on top of the moderate compliance even with the website. What we've noticed is that there's been a dramatic decrease in new short-term rentals since we have this rule. So we are seeing almost like 60 or 70 new listings a month. Some of them are, they take it off for a couple months and put it back on, and it went down to like 9 or 10. It's starting to come back up now, I think because of the warmer weather. So now is the time when we want to get back into the compliance and take up to make sure everybody's matching. And then also our sunset period will be coming up on some of that. So we'll be checking it out. And now that we are a couple years into it, and we have some more data, we're kind of trying to understand how is it affected. The housing market has this, I mean, the idea was really trying to keep ownership of the short-term rentals local and get some of the bigger businesses out. And also trying to understand if something was a short-term rental, now it's not, what happened to it, what did it become, or, you know, is it working? And then, last one.
I've seen more from companies,
Um,
you know, the kind of planning board, some of the different people, different municipalities are.
yeah, I think,
What companies do.
so what's a little tricky, of course, is because we have, you know, allow your resident, you know, a majority stake in an LLC is allowed. And so it's hard to figure out what is, what someone, you know, in an LLC, and then a lot of times we see the mailing addresses are in, you know, City, California, that's. But you can't live in 3 houses. Right, so that's like, so yes, that's where some of the compliance.
You have to declare it as your residence.
Yeah.
Why not?
You have to pick one.
Why not?
And then the last thing. Okay, I'll do my best, I'll try and look this way.
Well, I've been switching back, I've been stopping sharing so that people can see the conversations as they're happening. But you're back on share, so good to go.
Okay, the last thing I would briefly talk about is community land trust. So if you are unfamiliar, community land trust is when a community organization, such as a nonprofit, owns the land. So that an organization like a nonprofit would own the land, and then they'd have a ground lease, usually for 99 years, to a homeowner who purchase and have a house on it, that they own the house. You could also have rental housing, you could have community development spaces, farms, limited co-ops like Chris had mentioned. The idea being that if you're getting subsidies from the government or philanthropists for affordable home ownership, it's going to be perpetually affordable, and not just that the house goes back in the market and it's got a separate increase. And the idea also being for rental housing, then you can also put those standards and keep the rent capped, because you know that the cost of the land is separate, since it's owned by a community land trust. So we can talk more about this in future meetings, I think. But we've been working for over a year. So I've been working with a working group with folks from other towns in the county, Cloud Lake, Belmont, Chatham, other areas, because community land trust is something that I think will be most successful for us at a county scale. I've been well too small to pull off the operation of it on our own. So we have company with Trillium Housing Trust. Trillium is a local 3-petal flower. Community land trust have a tripartite board of residents, community members, and like public officials or policy experts. And so we are currently in the process of building up our capacity as a board, and we're going to be conducting stakeholder meetings over the next couple months to get input on how we have draft bylaws. We want to get more input on some of the key questions of how people want to see this operate, and then we'll be applying for 501c3 status this year, and then hopefully having a pilot project within the next 12 months is the goal. So this is something that we're really excited about, but it's in infancy stages, and needs to work at a county level. And yeah, and any questions, I'm happy to talk more about any of these initiatives. Any questions? questions from folks?
I had a question, sorry, I had a question.
Sure.
I was trying to understand the history of Hudson starting a housing trust as compared to Dutchess County, which covers the whole county. I don't think there's a Poughkeepsie Housing Trust. How, and could you just give some background on that? Was there an attempt to start a countywide housing trust, yeah, how did it come about that it would just be the Hudson Housing Trust at first?
It was initiated by a group from Hudson, like the council members and folks from some of our nonprofits, mayors part of this. And this was one of the ideas when the city of Hudson won that $1 million grant. We were the smallest city to win it, and we didn't have a lot of projects that could easily be deployed. And the idea was how could we use this to perpetuate projects to align. And so that was where the idea came from. My understanding of the Dutchess County one was that it was related to the influx of ARPA funds the county received, and that helped them to kind of get moving off the ground.
So it was a matter of the choice of the founders? Is that what I'm hearing?
Is your question about the housing trust or the community land trust?
No, the housing trust, because it's the Hudson Housing Trust, right? The city of
Yeah,
Hudson.
they applied for that money, they got that money.
Yeah, and it's under the city of Hudson, right? So in the
Yeah,
beginning,
correct me if I'm wrong, and were you present for that application? That was before you? Mr. Mayor, you can feel free to speak up if I'm incorrect, or if I'm not, I'd like to do that. Hudson's receipt of that grant is based on kind of like the specific economic and demographic factors that exist in Hudson. Now, Hudson has a very different AMI, they've got a very different economic and demographic makeup than the rest of the county. I don't know that an application from the county would have been as strong as Hudson's. Is that?
Yeah, that is correct. Yeah, the AMI of the county is much higher.
so that makes sense to me. So it was a stronger way to apply for the grant, to take it for the city of Hudson. And it's the city of Hudson government, right? It's under the city of Hudson government, correct?
Yeah, and I think this is before my time, but it was a very unified group with political will, both of nonprofits and the common council and the mayor, who put together a very cohesive application from the city.
But now there's thought of expanding the scope to include places outside of Hudson.
For the housing, for the housing trust fund, Hudson's, the money, since it was directly came to Hudson, it would be specific to us. I think if the county wanted to create one of their own, that would make sense. And I'm more than happy to share the tons of files I have on this stuff. But I think they'd be separate funds on money.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
It's my understanding that Newburgh is structured the same way. Newburgh, the city, has its own versus the county of Orange County. So Dutchess is a different, but I know that it's the same way in Newburgh. There's a group that's just focused on the city.
And which did Newburgh come first, and then the county
Newburgh
came,
was, I think, prior to Hudson in this work.
and before the county took on the idea of a housing task force? Do you know that?
I don't believe so. I think it was a collaboration between nonprofit organizations, government, and some facilitation with Patterns for Progress, I think is how it happened.
But Newburgh set up their housing trust first, and then the county set up one separately. Is that right?
I believe so, yes.
I mean, it just seems to me that maybe we're in the same position, right? We have a very strong, it sounds like a very strong and vibrant approach in Hudson for their housing trust. Congratulations. So maybe we're in a place now where the county needs to figure out a way to create a housing trust to marriage with what the work they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of initialisms in housing, as there are most things in the nonprofit world. Oh, yeah. So Newburgh has a land bank. I'm not sure if Newburgh has a city housing trust. And then Dutchess's housing trust fund is, I believe, it's a split housing trust fund between both the county and the city of Poughkeepsie. So they kind of have a joint venture with their housing trust fund.
Would you mind putting the spaces back up on the screen? Thank you.
Well, I mean, the point is the administration, right? I mean, the point is these organizations take staff to run. And outside of Hudson, our towns do not have the kind of administration staffing to run individual housing trusts. So
No, and it would be wild for 18 towns to consider having 18 housing trust funds. I don't think that that's something that our towns are ready to take on. I think having a county level one makes a large amount of sense. I think following, Dutchess is one of the few county housing trust funds in the state. New York's only got about a dozen housing trust funds, and Dutchess is one of the very few county level funds, but clearly the state will allow that to happen. And I think you'll probably see more counties start chasing that program in the years to come.
Chris, do you know how Dutchess administers their county-wide fund?
It literally is 4 months old.
Okay.
So I've read a bunch. I don't know how many, I don't know if they've funded a project. They're accepting applications. They have an application portal. I'm not sure if they've actually underwritten any projects or anything along this. Double check that. I am meeting with somebody from that housing trust fund this week.
And do you know where their seed money originated?
A lot of their money is our. So that housing trust fund has, I believe, a $12.3 million initial budget, and 9 and change of that came from ARPA.
yeah, I did look it up. Newburgh has an affordable housing trust. But that's the point, though. I mean, it's the seed money, just as Brenda said, right? If I heard the presentation correctly, Hudson got $1 million as seed money, right? To start, and the key is getting staff to administer these grants and pursue these grants, and none of our towns, not one of our towns, have a single person that could follow up on any grant application practically. I mean, they're already overworked. So, I mean, this is quite inspiring, right? If Hudson can do it, maybe the county can do it.
Okay, was there anything else from the Zoom folks, or? I've got a few things I want to go to just for next steps for each of the committees. These are based on things that we talked about today, and that we talked about during the committee meetings. Okay, so for the outreach committee, just to review the things that we talked about, the next steps are to develop survey questions for that basis of affordable housing idea, and what our distribution method will be for that. And the same thing for the employer and employee surveys. Kelly, you're going to lean on that. Setting up the housing task force page on the CCC site, that should be really easy. I would imagine that would be done within the next 2 weeks or so. Establishing our social media, that's really just making sure you've got the username locked down. I've got that for Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. If anybody really wants us to be on TikTok, I could be talked into it, but it's not going to be easy. Inviting representatives from Ulster and Dutchess County to future meetings, specifically to talk about Ulster's case, the Housing Smart Communities Initiative, which again is modeled on the Climate Smart Initiative, and then Dutchess to talk about their brand new their county housing trust fund. What I'm really interested in is how they set it up 7 months after the recommendation was made. They should set it up. Desperately want to know that story. And then the 6 piece for the outreach committee is to get a hold of Greylock to talk to them about possibly expanding their deposit loan program into the county. So these are the things that we'll be talking about as an outreach committee on Monday. Really quick turnaround time for outreach. For our policy committee. The first one is to start reaching out to towns and villages and asking them specifically what items they'd like to see out of the housing and planning toolbox. Supervisor Collins, feel free to email me before you get off in Zoom today if you'd like. I'm sure you've got a few ideas. And then the second one is to create the first 6 toolbox items. I've got a pretty good idea what 3 of those are going to be. So I've got a head start on those. So we should be able to turn those around pretty quickly. Collecting samples of currently existing gentle density. This is something that came up, speaking of Supervisor Collins, after the presentation that we had in Chatham. Chatham's currently reviewing their comprehensive plan and updating specifically the housing section, the entire plan, but there's a housing committee that's really focusing on the housing piece of the comp plan. Just pointing out that some of the gentle density that we're talking about already exists. This specific building that I pointed out is directly across the street from, I never pronounced this restaurant's name correctly. Saison? It's Tim Kindred. It's right before you get to like downtown Kindred, that little crossroads. Directly across the street from that is this beautiful white building. It's big. It just looks like somebody's great big house. There's 8 units in there. You would never know unless you knew. And then the other, so number 4 is to assess the housing timelines of the towns and the villages, who's recently updated their comp plan, what was in, who's already working on housing issues. Researching dedicated funding sources, that's going to be things like how to fund a housing trust. Is there seed money out there for new nonprofits like seed money? And then number 6 is the impact study of Ulster County's Housing Smart Communities Initiative. They've already had, I believe, 17 of their municipalities enroll in the initiative, and it's only been active since October. So that one is already making really strides on Ulster. Pre-development, that parcel audit, again, looking at publicly owned land, anything that is close to existing infrastructure that looks like a developed parcel, just mapping all that out. Looking for project-specific funding sources. Some of these we know they're available on a rotating basis through Homes and Community Renewal, through NYSERDA, through USDA, but there are some other funding sources out there that we can track down. And again, creating that matrix that matches property types, funding opportunities. Pre-development, I do want to say, probably has the longest tail for all these projects. These are really labor intensive. There are some things in here that the task force, I don't think can get done on its own. Certainly the feasibility and build-out analysis that you see in number 5, we can't do that. That'll be something that we'll likely need to secure some sort of technical assistance or consulting grant, and then we'll just put it hard after that, see if we get any bites. And then number 6 is going to be the organizing study of the Dutchess/Poughkeepsie Housing Trust Fund. That kind of goes back to inviting reps from the nearby communities, but that one specifically. The Ulster one is kind of, you guys already have this set up and it's starting to run. How is that going? How do we set that up? Dutchess and Poughkeepsie is so new that I think we really want to talk to them about the kind of the legwork, groundwork that they did to get that housing trust fund set up so quickly. The big answer that they're going to give us is, well, we can't probably find you $12 million, which is fine. We're going to start there. But certainly knowing how they got that put together so quickly, I think it's going to be interesting. And I will circulate next steps for each of these specific committees to those committee members, so everybody knows what will be on your agenda for the next committee. 508, that's not bad. Are there questions from the public or comments?
I have a question.
Yes.
Is it all right if I speak?
Absolutely.
My question is, through Patterns for Progress or anyone else, are there housing surveys that we may use as possible templates to save us some work? Or will you share them if you develop your own or reach out to Pattern?
So the surveys that we've talked about were one survey for how basically who's been affected by the affordability crisis and how. And then the other one was for employers and employees. I don't know that Pattern has done those specifically, but I can certainly reach out. Their executive director is on our advisory board, and we've got a really good relationship with Pattern for Progress. They've done amazing work up and down the river. So those are things that they've already got. We can certainly tweak them for the county. They've also done, like, what do they call those? Community snapshots, community profiles?
Community profiles, and
For all of
they're
the
going to update those for us, for Columbia County. They're snapshots of demographics so that people don't have to get way into the weeds, but they get a good profile of what their community looks like.
I think the current ones that they've got are from 2019, 2018 or 2019, so they're going to update those for us using, I would assume, 2020 census data.
Thank you.
We don't have to formally adjourn, but it sure makes things easier.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Somebody got something?
Yes, thank you, Chris. And Cheryl.
Thank you. There's a lot of-
Yeah.
Great. Chris, will you guys be able to share the